I remember standing in the kitchen with my granddaughter Ruth a few summers back, a bowl of pistachios between us on the table, and she asked me a question that stopped me cold, plain as it sounds. She asked, "Grandpa, is a pistachio a nut, or is it something else entirely?" Because her teacher had said something in school that made her doubt what she always believed. I sat there a long moment, because I realized I had eaten pistachios my whole life, cracked 1,000 of those little shells open with my own thumbnail at church suppers and holiday tables alike, and never once stopped to ask myself the very question she was asking me now. She sat there watching me, half expecting a quick and confident answer from her own grandfather, and I had to admit to her plainly that I did not rightly know, which is not an easy thing for a grandfather to say to a curious child, but it set the two of us on a small errand of discovery together that afternoon that I have never forgotten. Most folks eat a bowl of pistachios at a holiday table or a ball game their whole lives through, and never once wonder what that little shelled thing actually is, where it comes from on the tree, or why it splits open the way it does before you even touch it. They call it a nut, same as they call a walnut a nut, and they never trouble themselves further than that. And if you have ever cracked open a pistachio without ever once asking yourself what you were truly holding in your hand, then you are about to learn something that will change the way you look at that little bowl on the table for the rest of your days, for want of something nobody ever bothered to teach you plainly. My name is Elias Yoder, and my people came over from the Palatinate back in the year 1838, and they have farmed this same piece of Lancaster County ground faithfully ever since, though I will tell you plainly, a pistachio tree never grew on any ground we have ever farmed, being a tree of hot, dry country far from here. But my grandfather was a man who grafted and grew fruit trees of every kind he could get his hands on, apples and pears and cherries mostly, and he had a particular love for understanding how a tree makes its fruit, and what that fruit truly is beneath its skin, a curiosity he passed to my own father and then to me, and one I have tried in turn to pass along to my own grandchildren, Ruth among them. It was my father who first sat me down with a bowl of pistachios and a peach from our own orchard side by side, and showed me something about the two of them that surprised me as a boy, and I have carried that small lesson with me ever since, and I mean to hand it to you today, the very same plain way he handed it to me. Here is the one thing I want you to understand plainly and fully, because once you understand it, you will never look at a bowl of pistachios the same way again for the rest of your days. Almost everybody has this backward. They believe a pistachio is a true nut, the same family of thing as an acorn or a hazelnut, a hard shell built by the plant purely to protect a seed. It is not, or at least not in the way most folks assume. A pistachio is what a plain-spoken man would call a drupe, which is simply the same kind of fruit as a peach, a cherry, a plum, or an olive, built with a fleshy outer covering, a hard shell in the middle, called the pit or the stone, and a single seed tucked safe inside that stone. When you eat a peach, you eat the soft flesh and discard the hard pit, and inside that pit, though almost nobody ever cracks one open to see it, sits a small seed, same as the one you are eating when you crack open a pistachio shell. The difference with the pistachio is simply that its outer fleshy covering is thin, pale, and not the sort of thing anyone would care to eat, so growers strip that covering away early, leaving behind the hard shell and the seed within, which is the very part you and I have always called the pistachio nut, when in truth it is a seed from inside a stone fruit, kin to the peach and the cherry, far more closely than it is kin to a true nut like an acorn or a hickory. Ruth's own eyes went wide as saucers when I split open a peach pit for her that very afternoon and showed her the pale seed curled up inside it, near enough the same shape as the pistachio seed sitting in our bowl, and I do not believe she has looked at either fruit quite the same way since. That is the whole of it, plain and simple, and once you see it, you will never crack open a pistachio again without thinking of it as a small cousin to the fruit hanging on your own peach tree out back. Quick word before I go further, and I promise I will only say this once and move right along. The old methods my family uses, there is more of it than fits in any one video. I gathered the whole of it into a book at eliasyoder.com. The book is the long version. If you want it, it is there. I will not mention it again. Now let me walk you through the why and the how of this. Step by step, plain and unhurried, the way my father laid it out for me, at that same kitchen table, with the peach and the bowl of pistachios side by side. The first thing to understand plainly is what botanists mean by a true nut, so that you can see clearly why a pistachio does not truly belong in that company, whatever we may call it, around a holiday table, out of long habit, passed down without much thought behind it. A true nut, in the strict and proper sense, is a hard-shelled fruit that does not split open on its own when ripe, and whose shell is fused directly to the seed within as one single piece from the very start, without any fleshy fruit ever surrounding it. A hazelnut and an acorn are true nuts in this sense. A drupe, by contrast, is built in layers, a skin, then a soft or fibrous flesh, then a hard stone, then the seed itself resting safe within that stone, and it is the flesh layer of a drupe that ripens and often splits or softens as the fruit matures on the tree, same as a peach softens and eventually splits its skin when left too long in the sun. A pistachio is built in precisely this layered way, only its outer flesh is thin and dry, rather than thick and juicy, the way a peach's flesh is, and that is the whole reason it gets grouped so easily with the true nuts in everyday speech, when its true botanical family lies elsewhere entirely. The second thing, and the part that always makes folks sit up a little straighter when they hear it, is why a ripe pistachio shell splits open on its own, right there on the tree, without any hand ever touching it, same as you have surely noticed in the bowl at your own table, without giving it a second thought. As the seed inside grows and swells toward ripeness, it presses outward against the hard shell surrounding it, and in a properly ripened pistachio, that pressure causes the shell to split cleanly along a natural seam built into it by the plant itself, same as a pea pod splits along its own seam when the peas within have grown full and ready to be shelled. This splitting is nature's own signal of ripeness, and growers rely on it, because a pistachio that fails to split on the tree is very often a sign the seed within never filled out properly, and such nuts are set aside as lesser quality, unfit for the best market, precisely because that closed shell tells you plainly the seed inside never reached its full and proper growth. The third thing worth understanding, plain and useful, is why pistachios so often carry that faint reddish tint to their shells that you may have noticed on some bags at the store, and why that color has grown rarer over the years than it once was. In the older way of harvesting, pistachios were left on the tree a touch longer and gathered by hand, and the hulls, being slow to come away clean, would sometimes stain the shell a light red or pink in the time it took to strip them off, so growers of an earlier generation took to dyeing the shells a deeper red on purpose, to hide the uneven staining and make every nut in the bag look uniform and appealing to a buyer's eye. That dyeing was never about the nut being any better or any worse underneath, only about how it looked sitting in a bowl, and it has grown rare today, mostly because modern harvesting removes the hulls quickly and cleanly enough that the staining problem it was meant to cover up hardly happens at all anymore, leaving most pistachios you buy today their own natural, undyed, pale ivory shell. The fourth thing, plain and worth knowing in your own kitchen, is why a pistachio you buy roasted and salted tastes so different from one eaten raw straight from a bag of shelled seeds meant for baking. Roasting, same as with any seed or grain, drives off a portion of the natural moisture within and brings certain natural oils in the seed to the surface, where the dry heat coaxes out a deeper, richer flavor that a raw seed simply has not yet developed, the same way a raw peanut tastes thin and starchy next to one properly roasted, or the way a raw kernel of corn cannot compare to one properly parched over a fire the old way. A light, careful roast at a modest oven heat, watched closely, and stirred often so as not to scorch the delicate oils within, will bring out that same rich flavor at home, without any special equipment at all, though I will caution you plainly that a pistachio left too long in a hot oven turns bitter quickly, since those very oils that make for such good flavor, when coaxed out gently, will burn and turn harsh if pushed too far or too fast. Same as good butter turns from golden to burnt in the space of a careless minute left unwatched on the stove. Now, the mistakes, because I would be doing you a disservice if I only told you the pleasant parts and never warned you where care is truly needed. The first mistake is assuming every closed, unsplit shell sitting in a bag is simply a stubborn one waiting to be forced open, when in truth, as I told you, a closed shell most often means an underdeveloped seed within, not worth the trouble of forcing, and a stubborn kitchen tool taken to it will more often crack your fingernail than the shell itself, or worse, slip and nick a finger if you are working with a knife blade instead of your own thumbnail or a proper nutcracker. The second mistake, quite common among folks trying to grow their own tree from a store-bought seed purely out of curiosity, is not understanding that a pistachio tree needs both a male and a female tree standing near one another to bear any fruit at all, since the tree carries its flowers on separate plants entirely. A fact my father found endlessly interesting, and one most nursery catalogs today are careful to explain plainly to a hopeful buyer, though many a disappointed gardener has learned it only after years of waiting on a lone tree that was never going to bear on its own, no matter how well it was tended. The third mistake, one that catches even careful and well-meaning folks off guard, is storing pistachios carelessly in a warm, damp cupboard, because those same natural oils that make for good flavor when roasted properly will turn rancid and bitter far faster in a warm, humid spot than they would in a cool, dry place. Same as any nut or seed rich in natural oil will spoil faster than a dry grain kept the same way. And a rancid pistachio, once you have tasted one, is not a mistake you are likely to make twice. I want to say something plain here, because I think you deserve the truth, rather than a comfortable story. I am not telling you that some man in a boardroom decided folks ought to go on believing a pistachio was a true nut, rather than a seed from a stone fruit. No one had to plan such a thing, and there is no bottle or product standing behind this small confusion waiting to profit from it. This is simply a case where plain old botanical understanding quietly slipped out of everyday conversation, the way a good many small true things slip away once fewer families are growing and grafting their own fruit trees the way my father and grandfather did their whole lives long. When a family works its own orchard year after year, grafting and pruning and watching fruit develop from blossom to ripeness with their own two hands, small true bits of botany get passed down naturally, without anyone ever calling it botany at all, simply because a father shows his son the inside of a peach pit one afternoon, and the boy never forgets it, same as I never forgot it, and same as Ruth, I suspect. Once fewer of us are working an orchard that way, those small true things have nowhere left to travel, and they quietly vanish from a family's memory within a generation or two, not because anyone hid them on purpose, but because nobody was left standing under the tree to pass them along to the next set of hands. And that quiet vanishing happens the same way in a family's kitchen as it does in its orchard, one skipped afternoon at a time. So let me bring it all back together plainly, so it sticks with you the way a good story sticks, after you have told it once or twice yourself, at your own table. A pistachio is not a true nut in the strict sense at all, but a seed drawn from inside the hard stone of a small dry fruit, a drupe, making it kin to the peach, the cherry, the plum, and the olive far more closely than to a true nut like an acorn or a hazelnut, whatever the two of them may share a bowl, as at any given holiday table. The shell splits open on the tree on its own, as the seed inside swells toward ripeness, and a shell that stays stubbornly closed is telling you plainly that the seed within never filled out properly. Any reddish tint you may notice on an older bag traces back to growers once dyeing the shells to hide uneven staining from hand harvesting, a practice grown rare now that modern harvesting keeps the shells clean from the start. Roasting brings out a deeper flavor by coaxing the seed's natural oils to the surface, but a careless hand and too much heat will turn that same good oil bitter fast, and storing your pistachios cool and dry rather than warm and damp will keep that good flavor from turning rancid before its time. Now I would love to hear from you, truly, because I read every single comment, every one, and it is from you folks writing in that I learn how this plays out clear across the country. In kitchens and orchards my own two eyes, here in Lancaster County, will never see for myself. Tell me, did you always believe a pistachio was a true nut before today, same as I did for the better part of my own life until my father set me straight at our kitchen table? Have you ever grown a fruit tree of your own? And did a father or a grandmother or an old neighbor ever show you something about how that fruit was truly built beneath its skin, the way my father showed me that peach pit, or the way I showed young Ruth that same small trick this past summer? What part of the country are you writing in from? Because I know pistachios grow well in some warm, dry corners of this country that my own Lancaster County ground could never manage, and I would love to hear from anyone who has tended a tree of their own or watched one grow near where they live. And tell me, plainly, what other small everyday foods sitting in your own pantry you have always called by one name without ever asking whether that name was truly the right one. A peanut, a coconut, a strawberry even, because I believe there is a whole quiet country of us who grew up eating things without ever being told the plain truth of what they actually were, and I would like nothing better than to spend some of these videos setting that right, one honest explanation at a time. I have found that the comment section under these videos has become something like a long kitchen table stretching clear across the country, and I do not take that lightly. And if this small explanation helped you see something as ordinary as a bowl of pistachios a little differently, I would take it as a kindness if you passed it along to somebody at your own table who has wondered the very same thing without ever asking out loud. Next time, I want to walk with you through why a peanut, sitting right there in that very same bowl of mixed nuts, is not truly a nut either, but something closer kin to a bean or a pea than to any tree nut at all, growing down in the ground rather than up on any tree or bush, and it will surprise you just how plain, sensible, and easy to grasp the whole answer truly is once you hear it laid out clearly. I will leave you with this. My father used to say that near about every ordinary thing sitting on our own table carries a small true story inside it. If a man only takes the time to ask what it truly is, rather than simply what he has always called it, and that a family who takes the time to ask those small, honest questions together, even something so plain as what a pistachio truly is beneath its shell, is a family a little more curious, a little more awake to the world the good Lord gave us, than one who simply eats and never wonders at all. I think of Ruth now, and how a single afternoon, with a peach pit and a bowl of pistachios, turned into one of those small, ordinary memories a family keeps close for years afterward, not because anything grand happened, but because the two of us slowed down long enough to actually look at what we were eating, instead of simply eating it. There is no great secret hidden in it, and no miracle either, only the plain, patient truth of how a tree builds its fruit, same as there is a plain, patient truth behind near about everything the old folks seem to simply know, without ever needing it explained in a school book. That is the whole of what these old ways are, when you get down past all the specifics of drupes and shells and roasting oils. They are just the quiet, patient noticing of people who lived closer to their own orchards and their own land than most of us do today, passed down to whoever is willing to slow down long enough to listen. I am glad you were willing to listen today, right through to the very end. Take a moment the next time you crack open a pistachio at your own table, and you will find you see that small split shell a little differently, knowing the plain truth of the fruit it truly came from.